So here's kind of how we're going to get things started here. I'm going to spend the first 20 minutes or so just providing an overview of the budget agreement. Then I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. And then I want to talk about next steps because there's always next steps. Even though this budget is finalized, there's another budget right around the corner. So we'll kind of get started here with that approach. And so here's kind of the initial budget highlights that I think are most sort of important for folks here to take a look at. The COLA's at 6.56. That went up from what it was in January. Obviously inflation, you could certainly make the argument is higher than that, but nonetheless, that's where we ended up. But in addition to the COLA, there's significant apportionment funding increases, 600 million in total that will go to your colleges. 400 million will go to the funding formula metrics. So depending on how you're doing on those metrics, that'll impact how much money you receive there. However, 200 million will go to increasing the basic allocation within the base allocation. I know that's confusing, but essentially what that means is each district will get a proportional piece of that 200 million, regardless of how they're doing in the funding formula metrics. So I think that'll just be based off of the size of the college. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't seen the details yet, but somewhere around that. So, the challenge here, of course, is that for districts that are on hold harmless, if the increase to your rates don't bring you above hold harmless, I believe that essentially means you won't be seeing any of that 400 million. Now that's something we're still trying to investigate and see how that will look like. But that's kind of my sense right now. And that's problematic, obviously. And we advocated for all of this funding to go to the basic allocation, but they ended up splitting the difference because the governor felt very strongly about this approach. So nonetheless, obviously this is a big amount. Even if it's just 200 million for your district, it's significant, but I think we'll still have some more work to do to make sure this is equitable. I'll talk more about the funding formula a little bit later on. Part-time faculty, I think this is such a big win. The 200 million for ongoing funding for part-time faculty healthcare, and then also a COLA increase for part-time faculty compensation and office hours. So now the ongoing amount for compensation and office hours is 26 million and 24 million respectively. So it's good to see significant funding towards part-time faculty. This is so overdue, as all of you know. There's much more work to be done here, but this is a significant accomplishment that we'll continue to work on. I see a hand up and some questions. I'm going to get to those later on. I want to go through the summary first. So hold on to your question for the Q&A section once I get through all of this, and I'll answer all of those at the same time. I'll talk more about the part-time faculty healthcare categorical because there are some questions about how that will be implemented. So I'll talk a bit about that later. 650 million block grant. So this is a one-time block grant that can be spent over 5 years. The funding will be based off of 21-22 FTES, based off, that's how much money your college will get. The funds will be available for 5 years, as I mentioned, but here's an interesting tidbit. To get the funding, districts must report how they're doing on the part-time faculty healthcare. So this was kind of the way the legislature wants to sort of make sure that districts are using this funding correctly. And it's interesting because there were lots of conversations about what this would look like in terms of how would we know that districts would actually use this funding to provide healthcare for our part-time faculty. And CFT, along with us, tried to put some very prescriptive language in here. As far as I understand, that language wasn't included in the budget bill. Maybe it will be later on in trailer bill, budget bill, junior language, but as of right now, it isn't. But what the compromise was basically requiring districts to report on their healthcare, part-time faculty healthcare and care in order to receive the block grants. Now, I don't think this is a terrible outcome. It's not what we wanted, but obviously districts are really going to want the $650 million block grant. So therefore they must report out on that. So that doesn't mean they're going to do the right thing, but it means that if they aren't doing the right thing, we'll know about it and we should know about it fairly quickly. And I think the legislature would want to act quickly on that. So I think overall that's some good news. And I think that's something important for all of you to know. Push your districts on this because they must report on this. The unfortunate part of the part-time faculty healthcare is that it's still going to be a 50-50 split between the district and the state. We had some concerns about this because we believe there's some districts that wouldn't put up their 50%. There's no requirement that they have to. So this is something we're going to have to work on moving forward as we try to figure out how this gets implemented appropriately. So as I said, always more work to be done, but nonetheless, getting the funding is a really big deal and something we push for throughout this process. Now, I mentioned COLA before. I just want to share kind of a graph here of the increase of costs since 1990 that we've all dealt with just as people, but obviously a number of these affect our higher education institutions and of course the students that we serve and of course all of our faculty members. So the reason I like this chart is because it goes back to 1990. Now, obviously you can see some significant changes just in the last couple of years, energy being one that really jumps off the chart there. And this is a cumulative change as well, just to keep that in mind. But there were many years within this 30-year window where we did not get COLA. So I thought this chart was helpful to show kind of over time, right? Costs have, for the most part, been increasing on things that impact our colleges, but we haven't always seen that COLA to match with that. So we are kind of constantly behind, just in general. As you all know, our community colleges are underfunded, but we're just constantly catching up to these sort of changes and costs that really impact our students and impact our colleges. And keep in mind that this is nationwide. So some of these things in California are different. Certainly if you see rents, I imagine rents are much higher in California than the rest of the state in terms of inflation costs. But you know, other things there you can note we all are impacted with. Also, in terms of inflation, I thought this chart from the LAO was particularly helpful. As you can see here, the LAO predicts that inflation will go down towards the end of this year and get a little bit higher than that 2% sort of average that the Fed looks for beyond that. But keep in mind, you see the shaded green colors. That shows potentially anywhere the outcomes could go. So you see a wide range of where we could end up, you know, just a little bit lower from where we are now. Possibly moving forward. So inflation's is going to continue to be a challenge. Obviously, it's something that all of us deal with in our daily lives, but this will impact the state budget. So that's something to keep in mind as we move forward, that these last 2 years have been really bountiful, if you will, state budgets with lots of additional funding. But moving forward, I think we could potentially see something that looks a lot different. I have some charts on that a little bit later. But before that, I want to touch on some other budget changes that I think are important for you all to be aware of. Equitable Placement and Completion Grant Program. There's $64 million for one-time funding for AB 705 and AB 1705 implementation, assuming AB 1705 gets passed and signed. What this basically means is that there is one-time funding that can be used over, I think, a couple years to help with the implementation. So this will help with things like professional development for faculty, help with other support systems that might be needed as colleges are now going to be even more forced into transitioning to acceleration models and eliminating nearly all pre-transfer level courses. So this is certainly helpful, but not nearly enough to what's going to be needed here and there. From our perspective, will be a number of problematic issues that will arise with this implementation. So one-time funding only goes so far. Ongoing funding is what really will be needed if this bill, if AB 1705 is passed and implemented. So the work here will continue, but I want you all to know that there is funding specifically for things like reassign time, for things like professional development, for things like tutoring. So grab that money while it is available over the next couple years, but certainly more ongoing resources will be necessary here. A couple items that we're super proud of that FACC played a really big role in partnership with the organization. Some of the representatives from those organizations are on this meeting. So MESA received a significant increase and now receives $36 million, more than $36 million in the ongoing budget. This will allow for MESA programs to basically be started at every single college. That's the goal. They're only at about 20, less than 20 now. So this is a big deal, and we have a contract with MESA to help them with advocacy. So we played a big role in this. EOPS funding, and this includes CARE, is increased to $200 million. This is huge. It was just 130 million a couple years ago, a little bit less than that. So this is a massive increase. Want to give a shout out to Libby Cook, the president-elect, almost president, or tomorrow maybe, of the EOPS Association, for all of her work on this. But this is a major win, and as you all know, we have a contract to work with EOPS as well on advocacy. So this is something FACC was very involved in. The Native American Student Support Services Program, I had to give a shout out for this program because it's such a big deal to get this in the budget. But also we had some Native American faculty come to us from here in the Sacramento region, come to us, maybe nearly a year ago, maybe 9 months ago, asking about trying to get more funding for this program. And we kind of helped give them some ideas. We advocated for this, and now this is actually happening. So it's really cool to see some of our Native leaders come to us and partner with us, and then be able to have success on a program that will be super beneficial for our students. So we're really proud of those student services augmentations that are in here, and just to again pat ourselves on the back. FACC played a really big role in getting these across the finish line, and again, something we're super proud of. Some other relevant budget changes: there is significant funding for student housing. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to break out or how it's going to be implemented in terms of our community colleges, but that guidance will come soon. But obviously, I think we all realize the importance of student housing, and there is this additional funding that hopefully we'll see some of our colleges build student housing over the coming years. The Cal Grant Reform Act, I think this is really important for all of you to be aware of. Somehow I got muted. Our organization, along with many others, including the students, the chancellor's office, almost all the stakeholders at our community colleges, were supportive of this as legislation that moved through the process over the last couple of years. Those efforts ended up reflected in the budget. And the budget has this language that would basically allow the Cal Grant Reform Act to become operative if there's enough funding in a couple of years. Now, obviously, this is really significant and something we supported. However, the challenge is we really don't know what the fiscal situation will be like in 24, 25. And quite frankly, I hate to be cynical, but I would say more likely than not, there will funding for this won't be available just on the trend lines of what we're seeing in the budget. Now, I hope that's not true. I think, we're always advocating for more funding to go towards our community colleges, and here's another reason why we need to do that. So our work's cut out for us, but I think as of right now, the 24-25 fiscal year is going to look a lot different than the budgetary environment we're in now. Now, of course, I don't have a crystal ball, so I could absolutely be wrong, but that would be my guess as I'm sitting here today. Here is the Cal Grant Reform Budget Agreement, some of the details in here. Essentially what it does is it expands financial aid for our students. Is kind of the short of it, particularly our students who may be coming back to college, returning students, older students who were sort of disproportionately impacted by the negative or by the lack of Cal Grant and financial aid offerings. So this would change that, which I think we believe is really important. So this is significant. There's no doubt about it. But now we just have to make sure the funding is going to be there in a couple of years. So our work continues. Some concerns about the budget. Certainly not everything is perfect, but I do want to say that there is a lot of stuff that's really good. And I think we should all be proud of the outcomes in this budget. But some concerns and work we'll have to do moving forward is the new funding floor that's part of the funding formula proposal. This was included in the language. And basically what it means is starting in the year 25-26, there will be a new funding floor, and the hold harmless will no longer exist. That funding floor will basically be what the total computational revenue, or TCR, is of your college in 24-25. You'll basically be held at that level without COLA in the out years. So that will potentially be not a fiscal cliff, but a fiscal downward slope that could really impact your college's funding in 25-26 and beyond. Now, we recognize that the governor is doing this intentionally. His approach is intentional here because he wants all districts to move over to the funding formula. So eventually that fiscal slope will lead all districts to the funding formula funding levels, which could be much lower than what colleges are expecting now. So that could be frankly devastating for the funding rates for our colleges. So we have a lot of work to do here, but before 25-26. So the funding formula conversations will continue. Now, for those of you that were on the Chancellor's Office webinar about an hour ago, they mentioned that this starts at 24-25. I don't believe that's correct. I double checked the budget language, and I believe the new funding formula, I'm confident the new funding formula begins 25-26. The last year is 24-25 in terms of the hold harmless provision. So there is another year in there for us to work on this. I mentioned this earlier, but the cost of living adjustment doesn't meet the inflation levels that we expect. So that's something that we'll have to continue to push for in future budgets. The part-time faculty healthcare implementation, I already mentioned this concern earlier about the language to ensure districts actually implement this. I mentioned the lack of ongoing funding for professional development and embedded tutors as it relates to AB 705 implementation. And of course, Calbright, for some reason, continues to receive funding, even though it's serving very few students. There still are some supporters of Calbright, but there's one less supporter in the Chancellor's Office with Eloy leaving. I don't know if that will change the dynamics of Calbright's funding next year, but we shall see. Okay, so I mentioned earlier about what will the budget look like in the future. Obviously, there's some significant things that could change the outlook, and we are relying on the outlook being decent, at least, to get a lot of the funding that we have put into this budget. So this chart, I know, is a little bit confusing. I'm going to leave it on here so you can read. This is from the LAO, so you can kind of read what they're saying, but they're basically giving the likelihood of what funding would be like during a recession. So the lighter shaded area, that greenish area, is if there's no recession. That's what our funding level would be like. The darker shaded area is if there is. And the red dot is what we need to just basically maintain the funding that we have now. So you can see if we have a recession, we are not able to maintain the funding we have now, and we're pretty far away from it. Now, we do obviously have some reserves in our budget, but not enough to meet this sort of ongoing deficit that would happen if we have a recession. So this is something to keep in mind. Again, I'm not trying to be cynical, but just letting you know of the reality that we have so we can sort of do our best to prepare for the potential reality of a recession and what that could look like. Now, obviously, having all the money we have right now helps create a little bit of a cushion for that. So I'm not saying don't, go out there and spend the money that's in the budget. Don't let your districts and your chief financial officers tell you that the sky is falling, that we can't spend money because the recession is going to happen next year. That's not what I'm saying at all. We have the money, so we need to spend it. And we need to go based off of what we're budgeted. None of us can predict the future, right? We can only prepare for different outcomes. So I put this slide up here to us to be prepared for an outcome that may not be right where we're at now and give you an idea of how much of a deficit we could potentially face in future years if we do have a recession. So just a note for you all to keep in mind. So with that, I'm going to hop into questions here. I see we have a number of questions in the chat, so I'm going to get to those. And then if folks want to raise their hand, I see Nate, you have your hand up. If anyone else wants to raise their hand, I'll get to those after that. So is this one-time or ongoing funding for EOPS and MESA? It is ongoing funding. No cliff, just a swamp. All right, we're gonna have to work on our language there for that one. How can a district get the money for part-time healthcare if they aren't spending it on healthcare? I thought the districts had to submit a form stating their actual expenses for part-time to get healthcare. So on this point, the districts don't have to spend money on healthcare. It's just an incentive for them to get money from the state to do so. So if they aren't spending money on healthcare now, they don't have to. So that's one of our concerns, right? There's no language that would push them into that. There's just a pot of money there. Yeah.
But are they going to get the money? Like what we're being told by our district is they have to submit the form that's on the chancellor's website that says this is how much money we spent on part-time healthcare, and then there's a delay, by like 6 months or whatever, and then they get reimbursed for 50% of it. So they're not just being handed money without doing anything,
correct.
Right?
That's correct. Yeah, you have it correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they only get the money if they are spending the money. I guess I'll put it that way. Spending the money on healthcare, then they get the 50% match. If they're not doing anything, they don't get any money.
So I guess then I don't understand what the concern is that they're not really going to be spending it on part-time. You mean they're not going to make improvements?
They're not, well, so there's a lot of districts right now that offer 0 part-time faculty healthcare, and this isn't going to do anything to encourage them to offer healthcare. That's where my concern lies.
Oh, because they would still have the 50% expense.
Correct.
I got it.
Yeah, that's where my concern is. Raymond, is a break-even point where we can expect the governor's office to ensure we receive the necessary funds to at least break even? That's a fair point, Ray. You know, that's break-even point is basically just for ongoing commitments that are in this budget, but we don't know. To your point, you know, there's so much outside of our control. Some of those ongoing commitments could change over time, right? So it's just basically where we're at now. Right, so I'll give you one example. Hopefully Calbright will be an ongoing commitment we won't have in the future. That's one example there that could change things. The May revise showed roughly 1.5 billion for deferred maintenance. Is that still there? I believe it is. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that is. I'll look into that, David. That wasn't something I highlighted here, but that is how that is what I remember being in there. So could they? So Emmanuel, you said so they could they defer costs and respend it? Emmanuel, could you go off mute real quick and let me know what you mean by that? I just like a little bit of context. Can't find them on here. Okay, well, we'll get, if you can provide me, I'm not quite sure what that means. I probably missed it somewhere in the long line of questions there. Okay, I'm going to get to hands now. So Orny, go for it.
Thank you so much, Evan. You know, I think on the first slide, I didn't do a screenshot. There's something about the funding for part-time faculty compensation office hours. My question is, what does compensation here refer to? Because we know office hours, but compensation here, how is it going to be used? If there's money, can the district just use the money any way it wants, or does it have to be used in a certain way, like increasing this or that for part-time faculty? Because it's just so unclear to me there how it's going to be used. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a categorical that does already exist, and here's basically how it's written in the budget. Funds shall be allocated to districts based off the funds shall be allocated to increase compensation for part-time faculty. They'll be allocated based on the total actual number of full-time equivalent students in the previous years. Now, so the funds shall be used to assist districts in making part-time faculty salaries more comparable to full-time salaries for similar work, as determined through collective bargaining in each district. However, here's the problem, and I want to give a shout out. I don't have John Martin's here, but this is something he's worked on with CPFA. If a community college district achieves parity between compensation for full-time faculty and part-time faculty, funds received pursuant to this provision may be used for any other educational purpose. So basically, districts can say, we're already at parity, so we can use this money for something else. So that's the challenge, is what, and who determines that, right? So that's where the challenge is in the language, and something that can be problematic. But ultimately, as you can see from the first part of that, that is clearly supposed to go to helping part-time faculty salaries be comparable to full-time.
But Evan, there is also the office hour compensation. There's a separate fund for that.
And that is correct. Yeah, so that was also a COLA, and there's an additional 24 million for that as well. Now, you all know that this is not nearly enough to meet the need that's here. You know, a combined about $50 million ongoing. So there is office hours, there is compensation, and again, whether how this is determined and how this actually does get spent is a question mark, and you all are right on that. But I think what I'm trying to do is provide you all with the tools to be able to advocate locally within your district. And if you believe your district isn't meeting parity and they're taking the money, let me know, because then I'm going to let the legislature know, right? So that's how we hold them to account. Dennis.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Evan. Yes, a couple of things. One is on the part-time faculty healthcare. Under that block grant, it was included a reporting mechanism, with the first report being your current status, essentially. That first report is due March 1, 23. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I remember seeing on that.
And then the next report, which is to intended to show accountability, in my mind, is March 1, 26. So, you know, in our minds, I think it would be helpful for all of us to envision what would be a perfect use of our share of the 200 million come March 1, 2026, and then compare that to where we are now. Okay, so I just needed to kind of validate that March 1, 26 is the second reporting date required of the districts. That's one thing. The other is the two pieces of continuing money, the 400 million and the 200 million. I agree with you about that hold harmless sort of worry, because in the early stages of this morning's Chancellor's Office update, they were talking about the requirement for districts to file an emergency conditions plan, you know, for what we intend to do in order to recover from where we are right now. So I think that probably that's prescient to be a bit concerned about the hold harmless issue and how it will affect getting a new floor. And I want to clarify with you what I think you said you were not quite clear on, is that hold harmless will end on 2024, or pardon me, 2025, and the new floor will begin in the fiscal year after that. Is that right?
That's my understanding, and I double checked the budget language. So hold harmless ends 24-25. The new funding floor begins 25-26.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
and in terms of the emergency conditions, I appreciate you bringing that up. I meant to mention something on that. I know some of your districts might be under the emergency conditions allowance, also known as the ECA. This may be a district if you had like a natural disaster or something, might be an example. So next year is going to be the last year of that. I know a lot of districts have really relied on this to stabilize funding. However, I think the hope is that this additional apportionment revenue will help offset that. But I think what I've heard is some districts aren't quite sure if that's going to be true or not. So just keep an eye on that. If your district does have is in an ECA, that is something that could be important for some of our advocacy next year. But nonetheless, Dennis, to your point, I mean, you can see the signs that, you know, whether it's Department of Finance, the Chancellor's Office, or the Governor's Office, they want to get rid of the hold harmless. But the legislation as of now has it through 24-25. So, you know, we've got some work to do for the next few years. Ray.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize if you already answered this when you spoke with Kathy, but the 200 million for, excuse me, for part-time healthcare, is there any way of knowing which districts don't opt to take that money?
We can find out.
Okay, because it seems to me that there's got to be some public shaming that could be done.
Absolutely. Totally, 100% agree. I think that's something we're going to have to do, along with some of our partners at EdSource who've done some incredible reporting on this issue. I think they'll want to know. But yeah, so as Dennis mentioned earlier, the first reporting will be in March of next year, and that's basically just showing what colleges are doing now. So we can kind of match that with the funding that goes out. We can kind of get an idea of which colleges aren't offering and aren't taking any additional money, right? So I think that's going to be some work we're going to have to do. That's not written into the budget language as I see it now. But you're right, there has to be some shaming that's done there. And then look, I think in some ways, if a lot of districts don't offer this, then it gives us more of a reason to have some prescriptive language that forces districts to take this, right?
Yeah.
So
it seems to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ray.
No, it seems to me that for a district to not ask for that money is a really clear way of saying we don't really give a shit about our part-time faculty. And I think we need to make that as public as possible.
Yeah, keep in mind, some of these districts that may not take this money may also be giving their trustees healthcare. So I think we have a lot of ammunition to do some shaming here if we need to. But that's something we're going to have to watch for this next year. Yeah.
Happy to help shame.
Appreciate it, Ray. Jason.
Appreciate this Evan, and all of you guys at FAC who worked on this. I was pouring through my district's tentative budget for the next year, and there's a lot of updating that will need to happen. But one of the things I noted was that they, in the tentative budget for next year, also are truing up last year, the year ending right now.
Yeah.
They're truing that budget up, as well as some truing up from even the last year. And magically, some funds started showing up. Some, they changed a variety of funding levels and this and that. Where can we find a really good summary of those changes? Because in my district, it amounts to a couple $1 million here and there. And though they're kind of in the past, our union would love to have at those dollars. And so do you know where we can track down all of the statewide data on what changes happened to the past or the year ending?
I think the best way to do it is tomorrow, the Chancellor's Office is releasing their, what's it called? Their like review of the budget. That's not the name at all, but Lizette sends something out, and I can send it out to you, but it goes out to sort of a bunch of people, and they basically do this analysis of it. And they do a really good job of breaking this down in a way that's easier to understand than the budget. I don't know how they have the time to do it, but I guess that's what helps. That's what you can do when you have a staff like they have just focused on this. I would love to be able to do something this on my end, but I can't, so I just rely on theirs. So that usually gives an idea of what was pulled from the current year into the new year, and that's not unusual. We finished this year with more money than we thought, right? It's kind of just the bottom line. So a lot of the one-time money you see that the state has put towards things comes from basically this year. So if you look at the budget bill, you'll see that all the changes, like the Native American Support Services Program that's used with one-time funding, you'll see that that's actually put in the budget language from the current year as opposed to the next year, because that's where the money's coming from. So that's a long-winded answer to say, keep an eye out tomorrow for the Chancellor's Office email that goes out. If you don't get that, let me know, Jason. I can send it out to you. The other way to do it would be to actually look in the bill language if you want to, and I'll put it in the chat. This can be a little bit of a more complicated way of doing it, but it's Assembly Bill 183 is the trailer bill language that should have most of that in there. David.
So a couple points here. One is on the part-time healthcare is that, in my district, I think we spend about $250,000 a year on it, which is not really that much, but there's a qualification, the part-time faculty have to have done 40% load equivalent over the past year to be eligible. And they have to sign something that says they don't have access to the care from other means and so on. But it kind of puts us in a weird situation with the 50% match. What it means is we could double the expense before the district actually sees extra funding that they have to put in to the program, right? But then how do you figure out what you can do that's going to double it, but not, what's going to be the true cost based on what we do? And then, of course, there are the other things that come up. But what about part-time faculty who work in multiple districts? And how do you take care of that in terms of, if I've got faculty that work at Contra Costa and at Peralta and others, and who's paying for what? Does the district get credit? Those kinds of questions. That there's some complications in there that make it really difficult, I guess, to figure out what's fair for everybody.
Yeah, we tried to, oh, sorry. Well, let me answer that real quick if there's follow-up, but just to get to that point, because it's important. This was something we tried to answer through the budget process, but no one really had the answer because there's not enough data to really sort of determine, unfortunately, I mean, this is really a problem, but to determine how many part-time faculty we think would accept healthcare if offered at their specific district. And then also, to your point, what would happen if a faculty members at multiple districts, which districts' healthcare would they take? So it seems like we just kind of got to the place where, well, we'll just see. We'll see how it kind of shakes out, and then we'll fix it after the fact if we need to. So that's going to probably cause some pain and some complicated circumstances moving forward. So that's why it's important that you all are tracking this and letting us know so we can let the legislature know. Look, ideally, I think the best way of doing this would have centralized healthcare system to serve all of our part-time faculty. I don't know what that would look like. That would be obviously a heavier lift, but that would be the best way of doing this. And I think even I've heard some of the administrators make the same argument. So maybe this helps us go that direction, but I think we're just going to have to learn from this experience and go from there, which is not ideal because we want this to work and serve our part-time faculty immediately, but that's not where we ended up. So so for all of you on this call, keep track of how this is being implemented within your colleges, and if it's being oversubscribed or undersubscribed, and let us know so we can make adjustments.
So the other point I wanted to make has to do with the hold harmless going away and the new floor, because, you know, and I've said multiple times before, I know I sound like a broken record, that if we're going to implement the SCIF for real for the districts that are on hold harmless, we've got to fix the supplemental, which is flawed. It is appallingly inequitable for low cost students in high cost regions. So I mean, these are points that we've known and we've talked about, but, you know, something that's additional that's going to exacerbate this. And I was just noticing this the other day because the P2 got released.
Yeah.
And I was taking a look through there and I noticed that you were just talking about the COVID the emergency funding going away. There's a category on the apportionment reports that talks about emergency funding that is COVID specific and then emergency funding that is other. So and it's not exactly clear to me which districts that are seeing, because districts are seeing declines in enrollment all over, and the amount, the FTES base that my district would get on which the SCIF funding would be based if we were not on hold harmless, that number is bolstered up by this emergency funding because our enrollments are down like a quarter, and so this mitigates that a lot. So now you say that emergency funding is going to go away. That will, the point that I noticed, the trend that I noticed is that in those high cost regions, the same regions where the supplemental allocation is highly inequitable, that those districts are tend to see bigger reductions in enrollment than in low cost regions. So what that means is that when that COVID emergency funding goes away, that in high cost regions, you're going to see a double whammy of the inequitable supplemental allocation plus a sharper than average decrease in FTES. That's, you know, the basic allocation. So those districts are going to be severely underfunded once the hold harmless sunsets. So that is a big concern. And I know you talked about we got we got work ahead of us, but there's a trend there that's going to exacerbate this issue. Now, I don't know how enrollments will we begin to rebound after, you know, in the next couple of years. That could mitigate a little bit, but as it looks right now, it's kind of scary to see that double whammy hitting districts, and especially districts in highest cost regions.
It is scary for those districts in particular. You look out 25, 26 and the out years beyond that, and it gets scary fast, especially if we have a recession. The funding formula is broken in many ways, but it is not prepared, well, I should say, and it's not prepared to deal with a recession. It really isn't. Yeah. You know, imagine we end up in a recession where it's a significant budget deficit, and now all of a sudden the hold harmless can't be maintained. And now hold harmless districts are seeing even less than hold harmless on top of everything you just mentioned, David. It's kind of a nightmare scenario. So that's why our work must continue on this.
And that 400 million base increase, by the way, is going to be a real boon to the winners.
For sure. And that was done intentionally.
Yeah, but it's exacerbating disequity.
Oh, for sure.
Districts. So
for sure. Yeah, for sure. Thanks, David. Yeah, more work to be done. At least we have a few years, hopefully, to get that work done. Orny.
Okay, so thank you. I have two questions. The first one is I put in the chat as well. You know, I remember a while ago when we had, not a while ago, last year we had the full-time funding, you know, for hiring full-timers. There was a list that I think Jim Miller sent to the CFT Community College Council, members, on who applied for the money and who did not apply for the money. I don't know how he got the data, but I think there was one district maybe that didn't apply. For healthcare, for part-time faculty, can we find something along those lines? Where do we get the information? I would think the state chancellor's office should be able to get it, right? And let's publicize this really. If they have the nerve to not apply for the money to give healthcare to part-time faculty, let's publicize it. I'm going to write it on and publish it on SOurce, really, or ask to get published. And the other question I have for you is in terms of the performance-based formula. Do you see a way that it can be, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but it seems like in this climate, they have got to do something about it. Well, some people might just have to close the college, right? And maybe that's what they want us to do, close us up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So on the first piece, Jim and the rest of us got that data from the chancellor's office. So I suspect we'll be able to get that data on the part-time faculty as well from the chancellor's office. So you're right, that's something we'll be on top of. And we absolutely need to push the issue on that. There's no doubt. We have everything on our side on that one. The legislature clearly and the governor clearly want this to go towards part-time faculty healthcare. And if it doesn't, then we have, I think, the argument on our side and the legislature on our side. So that's helpful. In terms of your second question about the performance-based funding, I would say that one of the I believe one of the things that happens with the new apportionment funding, where there's 200 million towards the basic allocation, that essentially dilutes the performance allocation a bit. I don't know exactly what that'll look like, but it does, because it makes the base allocation a bit bigger. At least that's my understanding. So in some ways that's had that impact. Clearly, we still have the concerns about the performance piece. I think, if you look at the data, I don't think it's been working. Obviously, if you look at research about performance-based funding in general, it's very clear that it doesn't work. But in terms of just for us, for our system, it does not seem clear to me that it has had the impact that the proponents of it said it would. So I think the challenge for us, I think, is we're really going to rethink the funding formula. It's not, before we get to when the funding floor comes in, we really have to make significant changes to it. And I think FACC isn't the only group that believes that. I've had conversations with many of the districts that feel the same way. So that's what's ahead of us, is going to be significant changes to that. The problem is there's a lot of interests that do not agree with that approach. So we're going to have to kind of see how that works. But Ornate, to your point, I think you mentioned this, if we are staring down the barrel of colleges being closed potentially, that changes the conversation. Legislators are not going to want a community college to close in their district. They are not. It's just not politically tenable. So if that is where we end up, then I think that's just a conversation significantly. So again, I say this a lot, but the funding formula is going to be the main attraction at some point over the next 2 to 3 years. I thought it might be this year, but it is going to be. So just be ready. Kathy.
Yeah, thanks. So I apologize if I missed this at the beginning, but there's the $200 million for part-time faculty health benefits. And then there's the $650 million block grants, which have language in it about part-time health benefits. So how does a district get a part of that $650 million block grant? Do they apply for it? Or is it distributed by FTES? How are we going to get that money? And then what can it be used for?
There'll be more guidance on this from the chancellor's office that'll talk about what it can be used for. It's pretty flexible. It's based off of, I think districts are going to be distributed the money based off of 21-22 year FTES. And so it can be used for a variety of different things around, a lot of it around sort of, COVID response, things of that nature. What it cannot be used for is to help with pension liabilities, which was an interesting change because that was included in the May revise. So that's a bit of an unfortunate change. But otherwise, it's pretty flexible. I would say keep an eye out on guidance, just because that's going to be pretty from the chancellor's office, because that's really going to dictate how the funding goes. But to your point about the part-time faculty healthcare, districts can only get this block grant if they report out on their part-time faculty healthcare, on how they're providing it to their faculty. So that is the contingency that they made the connection to.
So is there any floor, or you just have to provide something?
You just have to provide, yeah, you just have to provide the data on it. You don't, you don't have to even say, you don't even have to be doing anything. You just have to provide data that says that you're not doing anything, which of course isn't the
really,
ideal.
You just have to be honest about what you're not doing.
That's how I read it. Yeah.
Mm.
Or if you're doing it, then you provide, information that you're doing it, but you just have to provide data on it. That's,
I was just hoping that, well, our district spends about $900,000 a year on part-time benefits. And I was hoping that we would get a little bit more of that block grant if it wasn't going to go to districts who aren't doing anything, right? I was hoping we would be rewarded by the fact that we are doing something, but I guess that's not the case.
Well, I mean, theoretically, let's say, for example, and I'm not going to advocate this position, but say you spend $500,000. I know that wasn't the number you gave me, but just it'll be easier for my poor math skills. So say you spend $500,000 right now, and say your district, say this is true, like there is no demand above that for healthcare for whatever reason, like that meets the demand, that 500,000, so you don't need more money. Your district could then scale back to 250,000 from the district, and then get 250,000 from the state for a plus, to get $250,000, which would be a benefit. I don't know if that would happen. Obviously, you don't want that to happen if there is more demand than what you're doing now. But if that is the cap on demand, then that's the upshot, I guess.
Right, but that's from the $200 million, right? That's not from the block grants.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of the block grant, sorry, that I don't believe that you get any benefit there from doing the right thing. You get the money though. So next, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Deepali.
Yes, thank you, Ivan. And I really wanted to acknowledge FAC, Ivan, entire team and advocates, especially Dennis is also very much involved in helping adjunct faculty. I mean, Dennis with community colleges for over 30 years. So thank you very much, Dennis, and everybody else who's helping adjunct faculty here. I had a question that when are we looking into having this budget coming in, the money coming in from, what we are talking, everybody's working really, really hard. We are expecting. And so that was one question that that's there. And then maybe one-time funding. And we know that this funding is very precious because we know recession is coming up. So how one-time funding or, maybe recurring funding and advocating, FAC is doing wonderful job and, a lot of other folks, but I feel that there is still need, not only social media, but maybe there are some relationship that people have built on one-on-one basis. That's much necessary. So those are little questions coming up. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate your words. And yeah, we're working really hard on this, but it's clear we have a lot more work to do, right? We aren't anywhere close to where we want to be for our part-time faculty. There's no doubt about that, but this was a step forward. In terms of the funding, tomorrow is when the next fiscal year starts. So that's when the funding, for all intents and purposes, is available for both ongoing and one time based off everything I said. And you're right. I think there's way more opportunities to do the grassroots advocacy that you're talking about. Social media, absolutely. I think a lot of our legislators are very active through Twitter in particular. So I think that's a way to communicate with them. But I think you made a really strong point about building relationships. I think that really makes a difference. So I would recommend everybody to build relationships with their local legislators. One thing to keep in mind, and I'm going to mention this towards the end, we're running up on time, so we're going to have to probably, after the questions that are up now, we'll probably have to stop with questions. But we are right now in an election cycle. We have an election in November, and the FACCC is advocating to get some incredible candidates elected. A few of them are adjunct faculty, actually. So that would be really helpful to get some adjunct part-time faculty elected to the legislature would make a big difference. So stay tuned on that. I'm going to say something at the end of this as well. Ornit, okay, last question, and then I'll answer some of the ones in the chat too, but this will be the last hand question.
Okay, I'm going to be really quick, but I really appreciate what Evan said. Everyone, please get involved in the election. Please, 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 please. My last question is probably something annoying, but I'm going to ask anyway. What do you see in terms of Calbright? The money that's wasted on Calbright, how much more are we going to waste on it? And I know we said we try this every year. Seems like that's our yearly event, right? FACCC has always done this, CFT's done this. Do you see it ever going to be, defunded, closed down?
So if we enter into a recession, yes, I think Calbright's gone, because I think at that point, it's hard to rationalize the additional money being spent there when we're cutting everywhere else, right? So that's what I believe will kill Calbright. A couple of things in the chat. Does AB 183 override SB 154? Yes, AB 183 is the trailer bill language for this budget. AB 178 is the budget bill. Those are the two you need to look at. 154 is old at this point. It was just a May revise one.
Thank you.
Yes. You're welcome.
AB 178, you said, look at that one.
178, yeah, look at 178 and 183. Those are the two you want to be looking at right now. Deirdre, can I have you ask this question live, actually? Would that be easier? Deirdre, are you still here? I know you had your hand up at one point. Maybe she had to leave and that's why she wrote it in there. Okay. Okay, so how do you donate to the PAC? Herlam's going to share some information with you all on that. He's going to put something in the chat. You can all donate really quickly on our website and make a donation. I think donating to the PAC is really, really important. Really important right now. That's how we're going to get some great candidates elected. In terms of the, Kathy, your question on pension liability, I believe there is additional money for buy down. I have to look into that because I didn't see it on my first kind of review of the budget this week. But it was in the May revise. I don't know why it wouldn't be in there. So I'm pretty confident, but don't get me at 100% on this. I'll look into it more, but I'm pretty confident there is some funding to buy down pension debt. So real quickly, just because we're running out of time, and I'm sorry to rush through this, but there's a couple other things I do want to touch on. And you all have the, oops, oh boy. You all have the PowerPoint. I shared that already in the chat, but what I would like to do is just kind of go over the last few slides here with you all really quickly. So here's basically the life cycle of the budget. And you can see on June 30th, where we are today, the governor signs budget, give or take. So you can now see, you can go all the way to the other side of this, starting from the beginning, July 1, first of the year. Now we are already doing our budget request with the Chancellor's office. So the cycle has already started over again for the 23-24 budget. So if you all have any recommendations on things you'd like to see in the budget, please let us know. Let us know soon if you can, because we're going to be submitting our budget request starting next week. Now, that's not the end of this by any means. That's only the Chancellor's office putting in their budget requests. We put our budget requests later in the year. But if you do have anything, please let us know soon. That would be appreciated. Things we're looking at now are additional funding for part-time faculty. We are looking for funding for embedded tutors, funding for data collection, and funding for student workers are a few things we're looking at now, but I'm sure there's other things you all have in mind that we can add. Okay, so looking forward, we're going to have some action alerts on legislation. We have some key bills that are still up, including AB 1705 that we're opposing and AB 1505 that we're supporting, which is to rebench the FON. That's critical as well. So keep an eye on our action alerts page. I just mentioned the system budget request. That's what will keep us busy for the next month or so. The Chancellor's Office, Board of Governors is still continuing to meet. They meet in July. The November general election, I mentioned that, that's critical. So please get engaged. Please contribute to the Fact Pack. It's really easy to do so on that page. Should be really, really fast to make a quick contribution. And if you want to stay in touch through our listserv, this is one way to do it. You can just send an email to FACCadvocates plus subscribe at googlegroups.com. And that's one way to keep in touch with some of the legislative things. This will be a little bit quiet for the next month since the legislature is going on summer recess, but we will engage with this moving forward. And my contact information is on there if you want to reach out to me directly. Again, I'll share this document in, or excuse me, I'll share the PowerPoint in the chat so you have all of this in case you want to share it. And hopefully this will be helpful for you as you all engage in this issue, in these issues locally, because the state aspect of it is only a small piece of it. There is so much that needs to be done locally, and I hope we provided you with some of the tools to be effective advocates to respond to this budget, and then also provided you with a resource in us and myself that you can reach out to whenever you have any questions about this. Hurlem, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, in addition to supporting like-minded candidates, we are also have within the budget to hire a student coordinator, which gives opportunity to community college student to intern with us and to experience and gain some experience with us and learn about the budget, about elections, about organizing, about the many facets that FACC provides, and the one and hopefully two that we end up getting, at least the one we have right now, she's doing amazing and doing a great job. So I just wanted to add that as far as knowing where your PAC contributions also go to, in addition to the important work on the ground, organizing, GOTV outreach and supporting candidates, but also to student opportunities.
And we also support, thank you, Hurlem, that's always wanting to engage students in this work. One other thing to mention is we also support trustee candidates. So if you have a trustee that you like in your district, let us know so we can put them on our list. And with that, we will wrap up for today. This will be recorded and shared in the weekly on Saturday. So please share it with your colleagues. Please share that slideshow with your colleagues. Get the word out. And if any questions come up, let us know. Hope you enjoy the rest of your summer. We'll be busy again when the legislature returns in August. So we'll talk to you all then. Take care. Thanks, everyone.